Very good, thank you. Yes, how are you?
I'm good. Could you pronounce your last name for me?
It's Zacharzewski.
Zacharzewski.
Yes. Well, with a V in it. Zacharzewski.
Oh, okay. You did it better than me. You've had more practice.
42 years. I mean,
it's good seeing you again, my friend. It's been a long time.
See you. Yeah.
So, tell me about yourself first, and the Democratic Society, before we get on to the EuropeCom conference and all that.
So I am a recovering civil servant. I did 14 years in Whitehall and in local government in the UK.
Okay.
And after that, I set up something called the Democratic Society with some friends. That's been going now for about 6 years as a kind of going concern. And we work on projects at European level, at local level in the UK, and at national level in the UK government and the Scottish government that try to experiment with what happens in that space where politicians and public could meet and could share ideas. So we do work on open policy making with a national partner for open policy making for the UK government, along with Involve. We do projects that work at local level. So we're just starting some work in Coventry on how they can build a connected conversation between people in Coventry. And we're doing some work with the Scottish government called Collaborative Government in Scotland that's thinking about how they need to change their way of working and change their approach to bring more people into the public conversation in Scotland. So NHSCitizen that we're going to be talking about today is one of our big projects in England. The NHS is, for those who don't know it, the big public sector health provider in the UK. It's a single payer system, so it's a very centralised bureaucratic structure. And the board, very early on in their formation, because it was restructured recently, the board decided that they wanted to have a different way of hearing from the public, a different way of having public conversations. And so they commissioned the Democratic Society, Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, Involve and Public Eye to build something or to design something called NHSCitizen to give them access to those sorts of conversations. I think what's interesting about it as the design process is that the board started with what I would consider a very traditional view of what a civic society conversation might look like. It was, all of the people that you might imagine would be in there. It's people from, the doctors' unions and patients' groups and, Cheryl Cole to, for the young people and all that sort of stuff.
Stakeholders,
stakeholders, exactly. Stakeholders sitting in a room talking to the board and, saying, oh, it's all very difficult, isn't it? And the board would say it's very difficult.
Very difficult. And what's for lunch?
It's all very difficult, and there's loads of great stuff that comes out of sessions like that, but it isn't a real step change in engagement, which is what I think they were looking for. So we ran an 18-month design in public process. So we were a design team, the 4 organisations, and we took our ideas into public workshops every month or so. And over 18 months, we built up this thing called NHSCitizen, which we're now trying to build the first version of. So it's been a very organic process, starting from a meeting in central London in 2013 and ending with a design that we published on the 31st of March this year. And now we're doing the first steps in building it. And it's very piecemeal. The tech is coming in as and when it can. The conversations are starting in a single place, whereas we want to start them we want to eventually get them working in lots of different places. And we're starting in 6 local sites to pilot some of the offline elements. But it's starting, and we've got the first NHSCitizen assembly of the real thing on the 25th of November, and to that we're going to be taking 5 issues that were raised by members of the public over the last kind of 3 to 4 months, and selected by participants on the Gather website and by a public vote to be the ones that people want to see at the NHSCitizen assembly. And the board will be in a half-day workshop with 250 citizens coming up with action plans on each of those 5 initiatives.
Okay, well, you've just covered everything. That's fantastic. I'm gonna come back on
practice. Practice makes perfect.
It's sometimes before, haven't you? How many times have you given that speech?
It must be 50.
51.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna go back and take all that apart and ask you more questions about it. But before I do that, just a quick note for anybody who's watching live or later. Actually, nobody's watching live, but that's okay. It's a Friday afternoon. People have probably got more important things to do than listen to us. But the thing is that NHSCitizen is run by a woman by the name of Olivia Butterworth, right? And she's like your client, right? So
she's the head of public voice for NHS England. So she's the person who's the immediate commissioner of the work.
Yeah, okay. And she's speaking at my workshop at EuropeCom conference, yes. Which is actually... you and I first met at EuropeCom a couple of years ago, wasn't it?
That's right. Yes, absolutely. The universal John Worth introduced us.
No, that's right. God, the universal John Worth. I'm gonna have to let him know about that.
That's right. Yes. So Olivia will be there, and I'm going to be there as well, but doing something else on open policy making. So I can also be around if people want to talk to me.
And at the Unconference as well.
And at the Unconference on the afternoon. That's right.
So my workshop is about online communities, and online communities are an aspect of NHSCitizen. EuropeCom is a conference for public communicators, not public participation projects. So there's overlaps, but they're not completely contiguous. You know, NHSCitizen is an example of an online and offline community process, which is part of a participation project. So the audience at my workshop are public communicators who are interested in online communities, and online communities are very good for participation projects, but you know, you can also just do communications projects, and you can also just do online communities without being participation. So what I really want to do is I want to get from this project NHCitizen some takeaways, some interesting points that public communicators can use when they're thinking about building a online community or a community, whether it's a participation project or not. It's quite okay to take it from the perspective of, well, we're doing a participation project. We're not just trying to sell a policy. We want to involve people in it. And in my view, if you want to do an online community and you're not doing participation, then you have to be asking yourself, why are you doing an online community? Because, you know, are you sure you're not just doing a comms project and you're dressing it up as something else, which came out very strongly from our workshop, the workshop that you and I did last year. So one of the key things I want to do is identify what the key issues are people should leave our workshop with. You know, I'm going to do an online community, but I need to think of this, and this. You know, what would be some of these issues that face somebody as they go and talk to their boss about setting up an online community or setting up a community? It doesn't have to just be online.
I think the first thing is definitely, like you say, the purpose. You know, what's the purpose that you're aiming at? Yeah, and what's the way in which you want to you know, people's interaction to be? So we in NHSCitizen, we have a very clear kind of core of it, which is that it's about the issues that people are raising. So the communications ought to be either about the issues or about the process, so that people can understand it better. There isn't a kind of, it's not a general conversation around the NHS in general, because there's plenty of places to have those. So if you're creating something that has a specific purpose, make sure it follows that purpose, but also make sure that you're signposting people to the right place to have the other conversations. Because I think there is a risk in the early days of any online community that you pick up a culture from the early arrivals. And I think the culture that you need to create is one that is focused on the task and focused on the thing that you want the community to be about. And that has to be something that the participants want as well as the government. It can't be just, you know, I want a community so that you can come and tell me how much the commission is brilliant and how much, you know, DG Regio is the most fantastic place ever, and they're all amazing people and very handsome too.
It is. They are.
Although, of course, it is. That goes without saying. But there's no point in having a community to tell us that. So I think there is something about making sure that the purpose is clear and the purpose is shared. I think the thing that has surprised us has been how putting something around the NHS online has had an absolutely huge response in terms of energy of the people who are participating. You know, it can be difficult to get people involved in participation projects, as everyone knows who's tried it. And although we aren't kind of, you know, putting millions of numbers on the, you know, millions and millions of participants on the board, even at this very early stage, we've had, you know, thousands of participants, when actually the infrastructure in the very early days was probably not really manageable with more than a few hundred. So I think there is definitely you should probably think about first the culture that you're trying to build, but also making sure that the tools are more ready than you maybe imagine they need to be. I forget who it was who said that if you aren't embarrassed by version 1, you launched too late. Now, I think there's some truth in that, but when government's doing it, and when a big public service is involved, I think there's a lot more riding on it. And so there's been a disconnect for some participants in NHSCitizen, but between the fact that it says NHS, which is a huge, well-funded thing, and yet it looks like it's a very, very early alpha of a test version of something, because it is. And I think that it's taken a lot of explaining, and some people still, I think, don't quite get where we're coming from, it's taken a lot of explaining to say, well, what we're trying to do is to put the technical tools around the social model. So the social model has really worked up all of this process that gets ideas to the right place and gets them from all of the different networks that exist. But the technology isn't worked up because that's what we've now got to do. So it's been quite challenging sometimes, and it's been something that that has grown organically and has had a lot of interest, but also where I think we've inadvertently frustrated people by giving them a big promise giving them a big democracy promise and delivering them the big democracy, but not perhaps with the level of tech that they would anticipate having a government's name attached to. So it's
the guy who said that, or the woman who said that, was probably from the west coast of America, and was probably
I think they may have been, yes,
and it was probably a devotee of the lean startup method and all this. And I've done that for the European Commission. One of the more recent online communities I built, my team built. The first thing we did, like 2 weeks after the project launched, we actually signed the contract. We had the website up, but all it said basically was, we're going to build this, and this is why. So we set out the purpose, and then we said, but we've got some assumptions about what you might want. Do you want forums or wikis or blog posts or what? What are you going to be interested in, and what are our assumptions correct? So please take the survey and sign up to a newsletter. So the only two things they could do was to take a survey and sign up to the newsletter. And if they forgot to sign up to the newsletter, they could tick a box in the survey and they'd be signed up for it as well. And we got, from a standing start, we got, a couple of thousand responses to the survey, which also helped promote the whole thing, that this platform was coming. And although that is incredibly minimal, and that's like an MVP in the classic lean startup method, because if nobody answered the survey, nobody gave a toss, then it would have been, maybe nobody wants this community. I'm not quite sure what we would have done, but it didn't happen. But it was still slick. It was on the EC banner and things like that. So I think it is possible if you do it in that sort of iterative way. But I guess then it runs into the problem that it risks running into the problem that the people who turn up send the community off on a tangent away from the purpose that you wanted them to actually follow.
Yeah, I don't think in our case we've had people straying away from the purpose. I think that people have been extremely passionate about the NHS, which is something that is a huge political issue in the UK and always is and always has been and always will be. And so I think there is it has felt a bit like a sudden rush of sort of passion and enthusiasm and energy, which is mostly positive, but is easily turned into frustration if things don't quite work the way that people expect them to.
Yeah. Right.
So I don't think that there's, I think that as we develop the site and as we get to a place where it is the thing that we have in our heads rather than the thing that is the first draft of what we have in our heads as code, then I think we'll be meeting people's expectations. The audience will grow further, and we'll start to build a kind of an audience of a size that can make the tools really live. Because for me, we never intended to start by building an online community. We intended to build a democracy process online, and the community element was meant to be brought in from conversations elsewhere. But because we had a very tight turnaround time for building the alpha, we had to start by building a community platform rather than by building a discussion, a deliberation platform with the communities elsewhere.
Because that was an easy thing to
slightly took us aback.
So because that was a quick win, or like a low-hanging fruit. Let's get a community going because it's quicker than a deliberation.
It was because we had a test community site from one of the early development phases, which we had to repurpose for the gather process because there was a hard deadline of the 25th of November for the assembly. The assembly has to happen on 25th of November because that's when the board are there and they're busy people and you can't shift them around. So that meant that we did have quite a rapid let's get some way of people participating process for June and July, when we had to do quite a lot more than we expected, quite a lot quicker than we expected, and without necessarily the run up that we would have ideally wanted. So there's a trajectory of kind of the development that's going like that, and I think we are reaching the point at which we understand where we need to go next, and the community is growing organically, and that's all good. I have definitely learned my lesson about how much more moderation you need than you think you do. because we were very, very sort of, oh well, it's a sort of reactive moderation thing. It's something where we'll if people are being really badly behaved, then we'll close them down and we'll step in. But actually, for the most part, it sort of runs itself. But of course, the thing about something that's being developed in that way, developed collaboratively, is actually your collaboration is what people want. They don't want to discuss among themselves the way they want things to be. They want to discuss among themselves the way that they want the NHS to be, and also bring you into the conversation about how you can make how this new process they've never heard of can make it happen. So we were much more in the room than I thought we were going to be.
Okay, but I think perhaps let's just back up a bit, because not everybody knows what the sheer size of the NHS. I think the NHS is the world's biggest healthcare provider, because it's the only one in the UK, basically.
It's the only single player. It's the only single payer, and it was until recently Western Europe's largest employer as well. Now technically employment is split among the various hospital trusts and others, but when it was still a unified employer, it was the largest employer in Western Europe.
So it's a very big beast, and it is. I mean, I'm a British Australian, and I know from reading the British media that the NHS is always in the top topics of conversation. It's never far away, right? It's a political hot potato as well. Yeah. So what is the offer? You say, okay, one of the most important things to do in any sort of community participation project, whatever, is set out very clearly what your offer is, what your purpose is. So just take us through it because you ran through it very quickly, very smoothly, I must say, at the beginning. But okay, you've got public events, and you've got an online website, and somehow you've got this process by which 250 citizens, they're not the usual suspect stakeholders, but actual just ordinary Joes like us, get to meet the board of the NHS with their idea, saying, this is my idea, and I've got X number of people behind me voting for it or something? Not
quite. So it's a bit like that. I think the first thing to say is that it starts from the idea of citizenship, because the NHS constitution, which is the thing that sets up the NHS, says the NHS belongs to all of us. And I think one of the reasons for the impetus behind NHS Citizen, and one of the reasons for the energy that people have and the passion that people have shown for it, is that people feel like that promise that the NHS belongs to all of us isn't always reflected in the reality of how they experience the NHS. It feels like it belongs to politicians and senior managers more than it belongs to you and me in the street. So we've had to, so we are very keen to start the conversation with, what can we do to make the NHS better? It's about us, and it's about us being citizens as much as it's about wagging the finger at government and saying, you lot ought to do this. Now, part of the, so the offer then is not, here's a kind of e-petitioning system where your moan can get to, can get to the NHS England board, because there's e-petitioning systems already, and you can write to your MP and you can write to whoever it is to get your message across. This is about starting with an issue, trying to work on a solution, and then taking that to the right bit of NHS England. Now, we've had, I forget exactly how many, but even in the relatively short period we've been going, we've had a pretty large number of issues and threads raised, many of which are not of the scale, like national scale and national importance, that would need to go to the NHS England board. So we've said... Give me an example. We had one thread which was talking about how there was a really positive program of toenail cutting at the hospital in Birmingham. No, it's a big issue, actually. It sounds strange, but my experience of the NHS over the last 3 years is that some of those tiny things, like toenail cutting policies, have huge impact on people's day-to-day lives and the quality of the lives of the people of their loved ones as well. So we had an issue which was, there's some really good toenail cutting policy at the University Hospital in Birmingham. It really should be rolled out more widely. Now, that is something that is both not, it's significant to those people, and it's a national issue in the sense that they want other people to hear about it, but it's more about spreading good practice. And the board, if you took it to the board would go, oh, sounds great, let's do more of that, without being necessarily able to direct that people should. So those sorts of issues we are taking directly to the right bit of NHS England. So we've said no issue that gets raised and gets support gets lost. But even if it doesn't end up at the board, it goes to NHS England and they respond. I
think the technical term is no wrong door, right?
No wrong door, exactly.
You're the door, and you take it through to whoever needs to. And how did that issue get raised? It got raised online
by somebody who'd experienced that service being given to a loved one and seen how positive it was.
So it was an individual
story.
bring it? How did that person bring the story?
They posted it on our website. So we asked. There's a space where we asked people to post issues, post ideas, and they said that's the one I want to talk about.
And what about because you said earlier that there are offline events that also happen, and I guess is that just to promote the fact that there's a website?
No. On the contrary, we see them as equal strands. So some of the ideas that are going to be discussed at the assembly will have come from offline participation as much as online.
Okay.
So one of our team spent most of the summer going from event to event and offline forum to offline forum, talking not just about NHS Citizen, but getting people's ideas, and then they were reflected online as an issue that was raised at Oakhampton NHS Citizen events, Stafford NHS Citizen event, and so on. And the aim over time is to build a network of communities and groups and offline forums, not specifically badged NHS Citizen, but which know that NHS Citizen is a place that they can take the big issues that they're coming up against. So we don't want to create a whole new structure, because God knows there are enough structures in the NHS as it is. We want to be not an organisation, a thing that connects up the existing structures and connects up the existing conversations far more than being like a single website where everything happens.
So if you were, are you organising all of these events yourselves, or are you sometimes saying there's an event that's being organised by somebody else? Let's go there.
We're hardly ever organising them ourselves. So it's existing groups like the NHS Youth Forum. It's existing bodies like Health Watch, which is the national sort of patient voice champion, and which has local branches. And so we've been doing all sorts of out and about. We went to the Holsworthy show. Holsworthy is a town in rural Devon, and we did a stall there. We did a stall outside the People's History Museum in Manchester. So we've done all sorts of things to try and get people to raise ideas. And obviously, it's also about raising awareness at this stage. But over time, we would hope that, for example, if you lived in Beaconsfield and there was a Beaconsfield patient participation group that had come up against a really significant problem, then they would think that one of the ways that they could address it or see it addressed would be to ask NHS Citizen, or to propose it on NHS Citizen as one of the issues that gets taken forward. But also that there is an opportunity through NHS Citizen to find other people who are interested in the same issue. Because if you have a problem, or if you have a suggestion even in Beaconsfield, it may well be that somebody in Birkenhead or somebody in Stafford has exactly those same issues. So it's about trying to create a network of networks, one that doesn't just rely on where you live or what your condition is, but enables you to see all of the different conversations that are going on.
In other words, creating that long tail that people can access, because sure, I'll explain that in the blog post, because I don't want to go on about that too long. One of the key issues which face a lot of online communities, whether it's a participation project or not, is getting out of the vicious circle. Because you launch your website, and the value of any sort of community is proportional to the square of the number of people in it. But you launch your website, there's nobody in it because it's new. The value of 0 squared is still 0. How do you kick out of that? How do you get things started, get people?
Well, this is where the offline events were really helpful. We already had because we've been doing the public design process, we already had a committed group of people who'd followed us through that process, and who were able to. So the NHS has a set of strategic partners who range from very kind of traditional organisations like the like Citizens Advice Bureau and things like that, really long-term, well-established organisations, through to patient groups that might be quite ephemeral and might kind of grow up and change from time to time. So those organisations and the bigger strategic partners are on a mailing list that the Patient to Public Voice team hold. So they were the first people to find out about NHS Citizen, and we invited them every time we were in a particular region for one of our design days. We invited the networks in that region to participate, and so over time we had a pretty widely geographically spread network of a few hundred people who, in one way or another, had been involved in the design process, either by commenting or by coming to a workshop or by putting in suggestions.
So it's like a series of concentric rings, isn't it?
Yes,
when you start on day 0, you've got an existing legacy mailing list of people who might be interested. You reach out to them first, you bring some of them in, and then their presence helps get things started and reaching out to is multiplying networks and concentric rings. Okay.
Yes, and I think one of the challenges for us is that at the moment we're getting to the point where the nature of the conversations is such that in some ways they'd be better hosted elsewhere. So if you're having a conversation about diabetes, sometimes you need to bring in the conversations from diabetes forums and things like that. So I think there is a point between now and maybe the end of next year where we have to push those conversations out into the world and say, actually, don't have your conversation here. Have your conversation on the Diabetes UK forum or on this patient participation forum, and bring the conclusions back to us so that we become something that is a holder and a signposter of discussions and a route for those discussions to get somewhere, more than trying to reinvent the moderation policies and reinvent the structures and reinvent the issues that plenty of other people have already solved out there. So we don't want to suck traffic away from other people. We want to provide a way for those issues to go to the right place quickly. That's
interesting, because one of the most toxic problems that face any of the projects I've ever been involved in here in Brussels has been competition between projects for the European Commission. That there's more than one project trying to do the same thing, and they're all replicating each other's work and sort of competing with each other, even though they're sort of trying to achieve slightly, they've been set up perhaps with slightly different purposes, but in order to get the same people involved. And of course, quite often they are targeting the same audience. That audience has only got so many hours in the day, and they feel a bit bothered, but they have to be involved in all of these different websites. And it seems like you've managed to avoid that by having a sort of an enlightened self-interest, by self-identifying.
I think our goal is absolutely to achieve that. I think what's proven technologically quite difficult is to get to that place. So I think over time, that's where we want to get to. We want to try and draw in discussions from elsewhere more than discussions are starting on the site. But at the moment, we're still in the place where people hear NHSCitizen, I go to NHSCitizen, I do the thing. And it's quite sort of linear. Whereas actually what we want to create is a networked conversation rather than just a linear conversation on a particular website.
I hope you've got a picture in your brain that you can put onto your PowerPoint slide for in a couple of weeks' time, because I get what you're talking about, but it's so hard, it's so complicated, and you need a really good picture for your PowerPoint.
Well, Oliver Escobar, who's the professor, or who's a lecturer in public participation at Edinburgh, described us at one conference as the most exciting participation project in Europe in the last 20 years, which is a great thing to hear. But also, it does bring into focus the fact that we have, there is an enormous thing that we've set ourselves as a task, and the challenge is no smaller than it was 3 years ago. But we have maybe a few of the answers as to the sorts of tools that we need to make happen.
Okay, well, I'm really great that it's fantastic that you're going to come to Brussels to tell people about this. But coming back to the online-offline thing, because this is one of my personal bugbears, not bugbears, it's one of my favorite things, in fact, the integration of the online and offline thing. Have you managed to actually integrate the conversations that are happening? People meet at a workshop perhaps, and then they continue the conversation online, or they start the conversation online and then they meet at a physical event. Have you cracked that yet?
There's a sort of trickle of conversation that goes both ways. I think at the moment we're still finding that people might come across NHSCitizen offline and then do their first contribution online. People whose first contribution is offline, the flow of those people onto the website to then participate in the conversation afterwards has been quite small. But that's something that we're going to be looking at in the next phase, how we make that more of a reality.
The very first time I ever did anything like this was the other way around. It was, if you want to come to our event in 9 months' time, then get involved in the online community and help us figure out what we should talk about. And there'd be calls for papers and competitions and all sorts of things, including real online competitions for which of these 190 great networking session ideas should we actually do, because we've only got room for 100 of them. So there was a real online competition almost, but a very collaborative one, and that really raised the level, it improved the quality of the physical event, and it allowed the physical event to stimulate the emergence of the online conversation, which then continued on during and then after the event. And it's very useful when you have a repeating series of events, when they come back regularly. Is that something you've tried?
So that's something we did during the design process, and I think one of the things we've learned from this last 6 months is that we left it too long before doing more design events. We should have kept the design event rhythm going, while we were doing the build, so that people could have offline opportunities to come and participate, not in the issue raising, idea creation, but actually in how the system was working. So we've got one of those in the diary now for the end of the year, and that's going to be the first, but we're going to try to do them more regularly. So rather than doing them every 6 months, which was our original plan, we're going to try to do them at least every quarter and possibly more frequently, because I think that during the process, those sorts of opportunities for people to come together and just step back and think about the process are really useful.
Okay. Well, we've been talking about half an hour. I'm just looking through my list of key issues, which, I posted on the Knowledge Hub group about, what I think are the key issues facing, any sort of online community. I think we've covered most of them. Perhaps the most important one, particularly when it comes to participation, is the integration of the participation process back into the organization. Now, this is an explicit part of NHSCitizen, but how, in the end of the day, is something coming out of NHSCitizen going to change the way the NHS works? And is the NHS ready to actually, actually give those ideas traction and change internal policies or whatever?
So I think one of the problems we have when we try to describe NHSCitizen is that people think it's a website, and we say, no, it's not a website, it's more of a process. And actually, it's not even just a process, it's also a cultural change program going on invisibly inside the NHS. So there is a part of the organisation, or part of the partnership, the Tavistock Institute, whose job is to go into the NHS at senior level and further down and help them understand how to respond to these sorts of initiatives and how to promote the concept of citizenship in their work and how to do more participative design around issues. And so we've done great work, I think, with the senior management team. I think our challenge now, and this is what we're doing in our local development sites, is to work with more local NHS providers, sort of in cities or in rural areas, to say, well, how can we help you start a change of attitude in your teams and change of attitude in services? Because I think there's a lot of the NHS is not just a machine. It's not like the Department for Work and Pensions that is largely a machine for paying out checks for pensions or benefits or whatever. It's something that's always delivering a human service. And I think that the most difficult job in the NHS is not is to understand that the NHS isn't a big bureaucracy full of people who are taking kind of bad decisions or who are lazy or whatever it is. It is a group of people who are committed to a set of really important goals that can only be delivered one by one, patient by patient, person by person. And so we've got to try and work out how our work on citizenship and the ideas that come from NHSCitizen are seen by the system as not just special interest complaining, but actually as groups of people who are coming together, inspired by and informed by the principles of the NHS and collective action, to say this is how we want to make it better. So we're really clear that it can't be seen as confrontational, complaining about the NHS. It has to be seen as collaborative, that even if something's wrong, we can make it better. And I think the NHS is probably the best place to start with that, because there is so much goodwill towards it, and there's so much of a feeling that it is, I can't remember who called it England's only national religion, but it is something that people really do believe in as a thing, and so I think there's an enormous stock of goodwill.
Okay, right. So this is like one of the partners in the project their only goal is to run a change management program that goes in parallel. So whilst you're out there talking to people and trying to get this thing started, they're working behind the scenes inside the organization, implementing a cultural change management program. Yeah. That's very enlightened, because that's something which I've been thinking a lot about, because quite often I'm pulled in to do like the external website of an organization, and you end up getting ensnared inside internal conversations, because in order to get the content to the external website, you have to have internal communications, and that gets wrapped up with everything else going on inside, including turf wars and everything else. Now, I won't ask you whether you've faced that. I'll ask Olivier when she comes.
Yes. Well, I can say that. I can actually say one of the great things about the project for me is that the team itself has worked very cohesively, partly because we know what each other's domains are. There is not a huge amount of overlap between those teams, and it doesn't feel like we're jostling shoulders for whose responsibility that bit is. It has felt a lot like a proper teamwork process, and
You're talking between you and who are the other partners? Public Eye,
Tavistock Institute, and Involved, but also the client, NHS England's Public Voice team as well, who've been in every design event, who've been very present. As far as they're concerned, they don't. The success of their part of the NHS, the success of their business goals, is completely related to the success of NHSCitizen, not just as a tool, but as a means of changing culture.
Yeah, okay. And so what you're saying there in terms of the members of the team knowing that they've all got a shared mental model of how it all works, and there's no overlaps. It seems to be like a well-designed structure in terms of the consortium.
Yeah.
Because that's, these things are all procured using public procurement methods, and which are procedures which don't always end up with the best outcome, let's put it that way. But this one, at least everybody knows what they're doing. That sounds good.
Everyone knows what they're doing, and I think everyone has a... I think we all look out for each other, which is the other good thing about a solid partnership.
And that's a question of teamwork and the culture of the project itself. And that's okay. I'm going to add that to the key issues because I've seen if everybody has to work together, and if they're not in the same company, that can not necessarily happen. Okay, yeah, there's something I can change my slides for. Okay, then. Well, listen, that's been excellent. We've been talking for a bit over half an hour, which is fine, I hope some people are going to watch this one day and get something from it. I'll write a blog post about it, and I'd like you to give me your comments on that. And I'll look forward to getting something from you for the workshop in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah.
When are you coming?
I look forward to seeing you.
When are you coming to Brussels?
I arrive on the 21st in the afternoon. I've got a workshop on the Open Government Partnership in Edinburgh that I have to come from Edinburgh to Brussels. Okay, and your session on open policy making, is that going to be talking about NHSCitizen at all, or? It's going to be talking about some of the culture change elements. It's going to be talking about what do civil servants need to do, and how do they need to behave, and what needs to change to give them the confidence and the tools to involve the public in decision making in a different way.
Okay, and when is that? Was it on day one?
That is second day, lunchtime. There's a panel session just before lunch, and then there's the unconference bit after lunch where people can bring their ideas and share and have small scale workshops on the issues they care about. Yeah. Well, I'm going to try to make it to all of them. Good. Well, I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon, Anthony. Catch you later. Thanks so much, Matthew. Cheers. Cheers.